Hello and welcome. I'm Ali Mustafa and this is Straight Talk. A war of words between Turkey and Israel over the latest killings in Gaza. We look at the fallout. And is peace in Syria any closer? We break down the trilateral summit in Ankara. Thousands of Palestinians protested in Gaza near its border with Israel as part of a great march of return. They demanded the right of return for Palestinians who have been forced off their lands by Israel. Over the past week, Israeli forces killed at least 20 Palestinians and injured 1,400 others in Gaza. The killings have led to a war of words between Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Omer Kablan has more.
A war of words has erupted between the leaders of Israel and Turkey over the latest violence on the Gaza border. The outburst came after this tweet by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The most moral army in the world will not be preached by those who for years indiscriminately bombed civilian populations. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan responded immediately.
Hey Netanyahu, sen çok zayıfsın, çok garipsin. Bir defa kendine çeki düzen ver. Biz teröristlerle uğraşıyoruz. Ama senin derdin teröristler değil. Çünkü sen terör devletisin.
Last Friday, up to 30,000 Palestinians made their way to Gaza's border fence with Israel to commemorate a tragic day in their past called the Land Day. In 1976, Palestinians protested against the Israeli government's expropriation of 2,000 hectares of land. 6 unarmed Palestinian activists were killed in the crackdown that followed. Ever since, Palestinian communities have been protesting the land grab. This year, the protest called the March of Return turned violent as Israeli forces opened fire to push back Palestinians. The Israeli army's use of force was widely criticized as excessive. The US, however, blocked a United Nations Security Council statement that condemned Israel. Protest organizers say the marches to the border will continue until May the 15th, the 70th anniversary of the establishment of Israel. Palestinians mark the day as their Nakba, or catastrophe, when hundreds of thousands were forced to flee their homeland in 1948 during Israel's War of Independence. The conditions in which Palestinians live on what land remains in the occupied West Bank and Gaza were described in a recent UN report as 5 decades of the development, suppressed human potential, and denial of the basic human right to development with no end in sight. And in the meantime, 1.8 million Gazans are still being blockaded by land, sea, and air.
We are being attacked in international waters completely illegally.
The issue of Gaza has driven Israel and Turkey apart before. The Gaza flotilla incident in 2010 led to a period of tense relations. 10 Turkish activists were killed during an Israeli raid on civilian ships as they tried to bring aid to Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And last December, Erdogan threatened to cut ties with Israel if the US moved its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. As the anniversary of the Nakba approaches, more violence is expected, as it will fall a day after the planned relocation of the US embassy. A decision widely condemned by the majority of UN member states because it's likely to cause further instability in the region. Omer Kablan, Straight Talk.
And joining me now to discuss the situation in Gaza further is Murat Bilhan. He's the Deputy President of the Turkish Asian Center for Strategic Studies, and Chaim Levinson, who is a political correspondent at Haaretz in Israel. Let's begin with you, Chaim. You've just come from Israel. How big of a deal is what is happening currently in Gaza for the Israeli government?
It's not a big of a deal, but I think it's a concern. People are looking forward to the 15th of May. It's supposed to be the Nakba Day. And one day after, the United States Embassy will be opened in Jerusalem. And the government of Israel is looking to this date, and they see as this latest Friday's demonstration as a practice to the big day and the 15th of May.
So it is a concern. You're saying it might not be a big deal. What role do you think the Israeli government and the Israeli state have played in what we are seeing in Gaza today?
Look, the situation in Gaza is very complicated because Gaza is squished between Israel and Egypt, putting a very heavy pressure on Gaza, and the economy in Gaza is collapsing, and they have maybe on the breach of a humanitarian crisis. But I think also we need to look at the role of Hamas that is leading Gaza, and the responsibility as what's happening in Gaza is their problem, and they decided to declare war on Israel, of course, and to have some fights with Egypt. So the consequences is also on the Hamas government, who causes the suffer to the people of Gaza.
But just for the benefit of our viewers, you talk about Hamas and its responsibility. Gaza is choked, isn't it? From the Egyptian side, from the sea, from Israel. So there's no way in or out.
It's true, but a sovereign country is supposed to have a good relationships with their neighbors in order to promote their economy. It's true to Israel, it's true to Turkey, it's true to the United States. You cannot declare war on your neighbors and then complain that your economy choked.
Is Gaza sovereign?
It's partially sovereign. It's controlled by Hamas. It's not controlled by Israel.
It doesn't have any control over its borders. It doesn't have any control over its trade or what gets in and out.
Israel controls the airspace and also the sea, but the borders, you know, they control the Israeli borders. Every country has borders. Turkey also has borders.
So you think Gaza is partially sovereign? Come on.
Look, if the Hamas government wants to improve the situation in Gaza, they can start a negotiation with the Israeli government, stop the military process in Gaza, stop the missiles program, etc. And, you know, when you have peace with your neighbors, it's much more easily to go along, no?
You know what? I want to ask you a question, but I want to bring in Murad Bey here as well. Let's take off that point. Is Gaza sovereign?
No. It's not sovereign. It's part of Palestine. If we consider it, we in Turkey consider Palestine as a state. And we recognize it as a state. And therefore, Gaza is a part of that. But unfortunately, there's no direct connection with.
A lot of countries, you know, over 100 countries recognize Palestine as a sovereign state, but Palestine, the West Bank at least, is still occupied by Israel. And, you know, in fact, what I want to get to, and Chaim, you've been covering this issue for a long time as well, I want to get your attention to how the media covers it or portrays this conflict. And I want to bring in a quote from Hamid Dabashi. He recently wrote, "When it comes to slaughter of Palestinians, the BBC cameras and words are standing right behind the Israeli soldiers." Tell us about the coverage of Gaza, and do you think there has been astute coverage, at least as far as the BBC is concerned?
Everything is a narrative coverage, and everyone has his own point of view, and you can cover many issues around the world with a different narrative, but I think it's exaggerating when you use the word slaughter. I don't think it's an appropriate word in a very objective eyes. There were clashes. If you can ask me if Israeli can kill less people.
Come on, Chaim.
I agree with you. Israel can kill less, but no.
Clashes, you use the word clashes, but clashes is almost between two equals. If you and I get in a ring and we spar off, that might be a clash, but you're talking about a people who are protesting against one of the most sophisticated armies in the world.
No one forced the people in Gaza to come to the border. That every country has a border in the world and protest. Most of them peacefully, but some of them violently. And when you have a huge protest, I'm sure every country in the world, when you have a hostile entity, sends thousands of people to the border to demonstrate. I'm sure every country in the world will take the same steps, and I must tell you, even much harder steps.
Fire live shots into the crowd.
It wasn't the firing of live shots to the crowd like someone was spraying like this to the crowd. It was a sniper target. So I agree with you. By the way, I don't like to kill people. I think that if
you
the
work
Israeli
for
government,
so
but if the Israeli government can kill less people, I think it's more important. But if you look in the world point of view, come on, you see what steps other countries doing in order to protect their borders from terrorism. I see what Turkey is doing now in Syria in order to protect their borders. So.
You're comparing the situations together, which is interesting.
No, not every situation is similar, but I don't see that. I didn't see that the Turkish government is, like you say, vegetarian when it comes to terrorism and protecting borders.
This is, you know, I want to get to another point, and I want to probably bring both of you in. We saw in the wake of what happened in Gaza and all these disagreements between the Turkish President Erdogan and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. There was quite a visible play out. First, we had a tweet come in from, Erdogan made a statement. The Israeli Prime Minister responded. I don't need lectures from someone like President Erdogan. How did this play out, and how does that affect the relationship between Israel and Turkey? Murad, I'll begin with you.
Well, first of all, I would like to just underline my wish that in this last demonstration, the Israeli government forces will not use excessive force, because excessive force inevitably triggers angry wordings from all over the world, with the exception of the very few friends of Benjamin Netanyahu. So therefore, I mean, the majority and minority are obviously clear. Now, what I would like to underline is that I would not like to go into polemics with neither of the two leaders. I mean, because they are angry speakers, both of them. So I would not like to share the same language with them. But I would like to stress one point, and that is the difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. They are two different concepts. Anti-Semitism is wrong because it's against the people, ethnical hatred, which I do not adore, I do not accept. Whereas Zionism is an ideology. It's the founding ideology of the Israeli state. And then later, it just, wanted to expand Israel's territory. And it did indeed, to some extent. So this second ideology is unacceptable for me.
I want to pivot off what you're saying to what Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi Crown Prince, he recently gave an interview to the US press, and he says, I believe the Palestinians and the Israelis have the right to have their own land. Going off what you're saying, the founding principle of Israel, you're against, as are many people. Anti-Semitism, you say, is absolutely wrong. Mohammed bin Salman is now coming out and he says that he believes in the right of, that Jews and Israelis deserve a homeland. How do you view all of this, Chaim?
Well, Mohammed bin Salman is continuing the statement of the Saudi Arabia and the 2002 summit, what we call the Saudian Initiative. That is the state of Palestine, the right of return, and also a Jewish state next to it. But he is taking it a step further. I think it's very important to him to have been perceived as close to the West. He worked together with the United States. He has some kind of connections with Israel, but still, if you look and in the last 4 years, the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaks about new aerial opportunities, but the Saudi Arabia is not willing to have any kind of public connection with Israel without solving the Palestinian issue. And I look at what he said as an invitation to solve the problem.
And going back to what Murad Bey said, that trading barbs or accusations in such an environment.
Look, about President Erdogan and the Israeli government, I think since 2008, President Erdogan, even he had a very good relationship with Israel, pivoted to a very harsh rhetoric war against Israel. But I can tell you, I asked a very high official, Israeli official, did it have any kind of influence about the real relationship? He told me no, the economy relationship is continuing. And I must tell you, I came today from Tel Aviv. There are 10 flights a day between Tel Aviv and Istanbul. People are coming from Tel Aviv to Istanbul. People coming from the other side. There's a cultural relationship, economical relationship. And it will be helpful if the two leaders will also stop with this war of words, because it doesn't help.
So is it all about optics then, Murad, as Chaim is saying, that the relationship, Israeli-Turkish relationship, is now actually improving since the Mavi Marmara days? How big of an issue then is Gaza?
No, I mean, first of all, in Gaza there is great injustice. As in the beginning of our conversation, it was mentioned that Gaza was encircled with the sea, with Israel, and with Egypt. Now, this small strip of land is helpless. I mean, they are just helplessly trying to push their words for the Palestinian state. Now, this, I think there's great injustice being made to the Palestinian people. What I would like to mention is that both Israel, since its founding days, and Palestinians have rights, full rights, to have their states, independent states, to live side by side. So I believe in the formal solution of a two-state solution, although Israel rejects it. Now, Israel,
well, in principle, Israel doesn't reject it. Israel says it's still committed to the two-state solution, but then settlement expansion and all of that goes against it.
Yeah. Well, then, of course, there's nothing left for the Palestinians in their own land.
And especially Jerusalem as the capital. You're talking about the Nakba. These things are coming to an end. Chaim Levinson, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Murat Bey, thank you.
Thank you.
A lasting ceasefire in Syria. That's what the leaders of Turkey, Russia and Iran pledged on Wednesday as they wrapped up their trilateral summit in Ankara. The meeting took place amid new significant developments in Syria, the capture of Afrin by Turkish-backed forces and the evacuation of 200,000 people from eastern Ghouta, which the Assad regime says is now under its control. Erdogan, Putin and Rouhani stressed there could be no military solution to the Syrian conflict and that a negotiated peace was the only way forward.
No country has the right to make decisions for the future of Syria. The future of Syria belongs to the people of Syria. It's the people of Syria who will eventually decide about their future by voting for amendments to the constitution and taking part in free elections.
Earlier in the week, US President Donald Trump stunned reporters when he said he wanted US troops to be out of Syria. The White House was then forced to backtrack on those comments, stating the US will continue to keep its 2,000 troops in Syria to back YPG terrorists fighting Daesh. And to discuss this further, I'm joined in the studio by Halil Akinci, he's the former Turkish ambassador to Russia, and by Yuri Barman, he is an analyst at the Russian International Affairs Council. Thank you so much for being here. I'll start with you, Yuri. How indispensable is Turkey for Russia?
I think, you know, the summit that took place in Ankara a few days ago definitely showed that Russia is looking at Turkey as that primary partner that should help, you know, bring about the political solution to Syria. We saw a short, you know, break in diplomatic relations in 2016, and we see how painful it was to both countries. So now, you know, Russia understands that politically, without Turkey, it cannot bring the opposition to the table. It cannot sort of provide that additional weight to Russia's own, you know, Russia's own designs for Syria's solution that Russia is looking to implement.
It might be a tricky question, but I just want to have a repeat of that. In a zero-sum game, Russia has Turkey and Iran to choose from when it comes to Syria. There's this perception that Russia now wants to hedge its bets with Turkey. Would that be a fair statement to make?
You see, I think it's a little different with Iran and Turkey because Turkey, like I said, is hugely important in the political dimension. Iran, it provides that necessary weight on the ground in Syria, something that Turkey cannot necessarily do in the south of Syria, for example. So I would say these are three elements of one, you know, of one design, of one equation, if you want. If you remove one of them, it's not going to work anymore.
Ambassador Akinci.
Well, you know, first of all, we have to look at a broader picture. It seems that there's a division of labor from the Western point of view in Syria, that certain countries should carry the burden, like Jordan, Turkey, neighbors should carry the burden, but they should not be involved in decision making. So the cooperation of Turkey, Iran and Russia is regional ownership, showing all the world that we are also there. So Turkish presence, everybody is present in Syria, and Turkish presence is being criticized. There is no justification for that. There is no justification for that. All the same, they don't need the justification. They just criticize. France has a right to be in Syria. United States has a right to be in Syria, but Turkey doesn't have a right to be in Syria. This is ridiculous, more than ridiculous. So we are correcting a situation there. We are not taking any additional steps.
Well, you're saying that the US has a right to be there, France has a right to be there. It seems that the US President Donald Trump doesn't want to be in Syria. Let's take a listen to what Donald Trump had to say on keeping US troops in Syria.
I want to get out. I want to bring our troops back home. I want to start rebuilding our nation.
So that was Donald Trump saying, I want to get troops out. But later, the White House press secretary, Sarah Sanders, came out and said this.
The president's maintained since the beginning he's not going to put an arbitrary timeline. He is measuring it in actually winning the battle, not just putting some random number out there.
No firm departure date from Sarah Sanders, but Trump is saying we want to get out. What's the mixed messages? I'll begin with you, Yuri.
Look, at this point, I would not read too much into what Trump is saying, because you know the State Department is extremely understaffed on all fronts, right? The White House policies, Donald Trump's statements, sometimes they don't match what's happening, you know, in U.S. Foreign policy. So for the time being, I would take this wait-and-see approach and, you know, see what's actually happening on the ground. We've seen that trip of Mohammed bin Salman to the United States and his alleged, you know, Trump's statements that Saudi might want to pay for U.S. Troops in Syria. So there's a lot of talking, not much, you know, happening policy-wise. I would be cautious as, you know, as to making specific, you know, assessments of those statements.
Would it be a fair assessment then, Halil, to say that the U.S. is almost irrelevant when it comes to Syria policy when you have Erdogan, Putin, and Rouhani standing so close to each other?
You cannot ignore the United States. They're everywhere. And moreover, Pentagon has an obsession. Now, if you have a policy on the one hand and an obsession on the other hand, obsession wins. So I don't think they will leave, but they have to reach a compromise because they need proxies. How long will proxies last? Direct confrontation they would like to avoid like everyone else. So there will be a compromise. There will be a compromise. I hope that this compromise will not be at the cost of Turkey's security.
Will Turkey ever let that happen?
Anyway, no, we cannot let it happen. You know, when I said burden sharing, that is, burdens are on us. 3.5 million refugees, and in Iran, and Lebanon, and Jordan. And on the other hand, somebody else decides the fate of Syria. Now, we have Astana process. We had a meeting in Sochi. These are realistic. These meetings try to bring realistic solutions to the Syrian problem.
But there's a broader picture to all of this as well. We see almost a tear in the Russia-Western Europe relationship, with ambassadors being recalled, with what happened in London, with suspicions and allegations pointing towards Russia. But we see a emerging new order as well right behind you, Yuri. How is this playing out at a broader macro level?
Look, Russia is that kind of actor in the Middle East that is very pragmatic, and to Russia, the optics of presence in the Middle East is far more important than the substance of its presence in the Middle East. So definitely this alliance provides that necessary optics of being a great power in the Middle East. That's for sure. But I still would not, you know, discard the U.S. role and how Russia sees the U.S. role in the Middle East, because Russia definitely sees the U.S. very important, and I think Middle East is one of those contexts where Russia hopes to reach some kind of common ground with the Americans. With the Americans. Turkey as well.
Oh, using Turkey against the Americans? How does that play out? How does Turkey fit into all of that?
These are, I think, different layers, because Turkey is Russia's neighbor. They share, you know, a sea, the Black Sea, right? So in that sense, Turkey is a hugely important partner. Trade, finance, everything, security. The Americans, it's more of a global picture on Europe, Eurasia, Middle East. So Russia is definitely looking to find common ground with the Americans on a lot of issues. Iran, you know, fight against terrorism. But it's just that these two are not mutually exclusive.
Ambassador.
Well, you know, first of all, in international relations, the dominant color is gray. Not black, not white. So we have to look at it from this angle. And then also you have to take into consideration that there is one superpower now. Look at the location of the carrier groups of the United States. They are everywhere. South China Sea, Mediterranean, Atlantic, everywhere. So they claim, or maybe they believe in that they have global responsibilities, which means they have global aspirations. But they call it responsibility. You know, in the 19th century, people were more honest. They used to call ministries of defense ministries of war. Now they are defense. If everybody is defending themselves, who is attacking them?
Well, Iran certainly says that it has to defend itself. from American threats and Saudi threats. And we saw, as you were mentioning, Mohammed bin Salman arrive in the US with a certain agenda, and he called even, he went after the leadership, the Iranian leadership. How does Iran fit into this equation? I'll begin with you, Yuri.
Judging by the statements of Russian officials, Iran does have a role to play in Syria now and after the conflict. So to the Russians, Iran should not, leave Syria once the conflict is over. So to them, Iran is not an existential threat to Israel, to Saudi Arabia. Russia doesn't buy that narrative, for good or bad. And so I don't see how Russia could be looking to, limit Iran's influence in Syria somehow. Russia sees that Iran is instrumental in bringing the political solution to the Syrian conflict, and Russia is playing on that, and Russia wants to benefit off of that.
Thank you so much, Yuri Barman, Ambassador Kinchi.
Thank you.
And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Ali Mustafa. If you've got any comments or suggestions, do share them with us at #StraightTalk. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.